My guest today is Derek Martinez. Derek began his teaching career in Nevada, teaching elementary PE for 7 years before moving to North Carolina to teach secondary physical education. He is passionate about high-quality teaching and received the Nevada Elementary Teacher of the Year Award in 2024. Being an alternative movement advocate, Derek provides opportunities for his students to engage in non-traditional units like parkour, outdoor education, archery, movement culture, backyard games, and more. Derek is looking forward to continuing his postgraduate education at the University of North Carolina in school administration and curriculum design. And now I bring you Derek Martinez. Derek, welcome.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Today, we're going to talk about the reputation of a physical education program. We might dive into assessment a little bit, and I think we're going to try to save some time to talk about standards-based social skills. Sound like a good plan to you?
Sounds good. I'm pumped to be here. I'm excited to talk shop.
One of your goals is to be the type of teacher who improves the narrative around physical education. Everyone listening to this knows that there are people out there who misunderstand what high-quality physical education looks like. How do you ensure that your daily lessons and your program as a whole are rigorous and demand the level of respect that we all know physical education deserves?
Well, I think you nailed it on the head. The amount of people that don't really know what it looks like is kind of the source of the problem. And so when people look at these programs, they don't know what it should look like. They just know what they've had in the past. And so that kind of puts this narrative on it of, if it's not what I've had before, what is a good program look like? And so that's when all these different opinions come together. Of course, rigorous education as a teacher is important, but college education from Boise State really prepared me in proper assessments and those things. But the truth be told, it's just about taking accountability. It's about being open to change as a teacher and understanding that the professional development that you go to can be applied. And when you develop this sense of pride, when you go into a PE role, it gives you more stake into it. It makes you want to be a better person, a better teacher. And so when you have all those things, the rest follow suit after that. It's about that accountability, holding yourself accountable.
Most teachers are faced with two choices. They can either do exactly what their PE teachers did back in the day when they were in elementary or middle school or high school PE, or they can search like relentlessly for resources and people to help them bring PE into like modern times. The second part is a lot of work, right? You don't find those resources readily or all that often. And it's part of the project that I'm trying to do by talking with amazing teachers like yourself is to make it a little bit more accessible to find resources that will lend themselves towards a high quality PE program as opposed to just rolling out the ball, playing 6 different variations of tag games every day.
Well, and I guess that kind of brings us into the rigor part of that. When I have other teachers that come into and see this PE, they see that there's differentiation for the kids. They see that the kids are bought into what we're doing and how we're doing it. It's because the kids have stake in it, I have stake in it. And then the scientific piece comes after that. That's when we do our proper assessments and these kids experience proper growth potential. They gain the skills that are necessary to pursue the activity after school, after high school, their adult lives. And so when you can make it relatable for them, it's a diverse curriculum, have assessments that are reputable, and the standard-based grading has all these different pieces. That's when people are like, oh, you can compare this to math. You can compare it to reading because it has standards, it has assessment. There's a point, there's a why to it. But that's like you said, it's hard to do. It takes a lot of work.
We're going to talk about assessment in just a moment. When you say rigor, what does rigor look like in your physical education program, either at zoomed out level, or what does rigor look like for students in a particular lesson?
The rigor for me is about holding high expectations, but at the same time, the students, they need to experience a proper growth. When we assess, like the presidential fitness, right? It's kind of the hot topic at the moment, and that's not a good and proper assessment of what they actually achieve. And so the rigor part of it is holding them accountable for what we actually teach them. You see these teachers all the time. They're playing these games for whatever reason, but then they go and assess the PACER test. But what did they teach all this class period long was overhand throwing, underhand throwing, locomotor patterns, all those kinds of things. And so I guess where the rigor comes in is I really try to hold them accountable for any of the units that we're in. If I'm teaching overhand throwing, I'm assessing, did they tee up? Did they put on their seatbelt? Did they take a step? Things that I feel like all kids can do, not just the athletes. So it's not, did you hit your target 5 out of 7 times? Did you run a mile in 6 minutes? It's more of, did you hit the cues? Did you learn the things that I tried to teach you on a cognitive level? And then demonstrating them in a way that everybody can.
So, one way to define rigor is by aligning your assessments to the standards based concepts that you're teaching students. I really connected with that one. And then also at the end of that, you mentioned that there's a cognitive component to it as well. I can share with you a little bit about what that looks like in Denver public schools because it is kind of unique. So, in Denver public schools, where the cognitive level of rigor comes in is in the language that students are required to use in each lesson to articulate what it is that they're learning for that day. So our PE teachers are expected to have what we call language objectives that go along with their content objectives. They're also required to provide students with opportunities to use language in an accountable way a couple of times throughout the class. I usually recommend 2 or 3 times in an average 45-minute lesson. So we see things like, really efficient turn and talks, or the teacher checking for understanding of skills verbally, not just physically. So students might be having to compare and contrast 2 different skills and use words like, I know that this is similar because blank, or I know that it's different because blank. So that's where the cognitive piece comes to me. But I really like how you layered in that in order for a lesson or a unit or a program to be appropriately rigorous, you also have to align the assessment to what you're actually teaching students.
Well, and I think when I also like about rigor, it's about holding them accountable just the same way. And I kind of like how you said the vocabulary and that language that we use is really important. For example, in one of the underhand throwing units that I do, part of our assessment that we do includes trajectory and velocity of the ball, relating it to scientific standards as well, as part of their deal. And so we're talking about how an underhand throw finds a high arc and has a slow velocity, which makes it easy to catch. And so then they can take that information from a cognitive level. And of course, after years of scaffolding from an elementary 6-year perspective, hopefully by the time they reach 5th grade, they can apply like, okay, I'm playing this whatever odd game that we decided to play. What type of throw can I use? And they retrieve that background knowledge. Well, I want my partner to catch it. I'm going to throw it high and slow with the proper underhand throw cues. That's the whole point, I guess, for me.
Just a quick reminder for listeners, the Colorado PE Summit takes place June 3rd and 4th in Aurora, Colorado, just outside of Denver. This free professional learning opportunity is designed for all K-12 PE and health teachers. If you are interested in attending and/or presenting, check the show notes for additional details. So, since we're talking about assessment, let's continue down that road. I recently just finished a new self-paced course on assessment, so the teachers can sign up for it if they're looking for graduate level credits. It's definitely one of those areas of our discipline that I'm still the most open to learning more about. Like, I feel like I have a pretty good assessment program and advice that I give teachers when I provide them feedback on their methods for assessment, but I think that there's so many different ways to authentically assess students, right, on their standards-based learning. What does assessment look like in your PE program? I'm assuming that it's going to be a little bit different than some of the Facebook posts that we see about grading students on participation and effort. I know that lately I have not been exercising my best self-control, and I've been getting sucked into some of those conversations. Tell us what assessment looks like in your PE program.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Facebook thing. Right? Let's say I as well kind of get myself in hot water sometimes, realizing that it's a little bit more intense than it needs to be. But I'm passionate about it. I think without assessment, how do you know what you're teaching is effective? I mean, that's the whole reason. And so, while I'm not a big standardized testing like the presidential fitness and those kinds of things, I'm not about that. But I am about holding kids accountable. And you've got to assess, because if you don't, how do you know what you're teaching them is effective? Where do you go with the next lesson? How does it scaffold the next tier, the kind of linear programming of elementary school to middle school to high school? Like, without that information, how do you direct them? And it's tough for me, and I'm hoping you can kind of tell me too, because my assessments from kindergarten to first look much, much different than my assessments from 4th to 5th. And they should. One, we have different standards, and we should be assessing over our state standards. But also, it's just their skill levels are different. And so the outcomes need to be different. And so for like a kindergarten lesson, let's go back to underhand throwing, I go back to those cues. And so for kindergarten, I'm hoping they can identify a difference between an overhand and an underhand throw. And so my assessment would be pulling 4 or 5 of them at a time, examining their throw, not necessarily holding them fire to the flame if they went from 10 o'clock in their throw to 4 o'clock. No, I don't hold them accountable for that, but I do hold them accountable if their palm is up when they throw. If they make an underhand throw rather than an overhand. But by the time they hit 5th grade, they're doing video self-assessments. They create a video where they see themselves and they see the cues that they're teaching, because sometimes understanding the cues cognitively doesn't mean I can physically demonstrate. There's a break there. You got to connect that break. And so by 5th grade, they're watching themselves through the cues, and they can resubmit these videos. And that's also where we get our cognitive component too. It's kind of this whole shebang. That's where they can get that immediate feedback the same ways you get a math problem. Like, oh, okay, well, why? And then when they rewatch the video, they peer reflect, they watch their peers and grade themselves. And they can really attach this rubric that they give them to see where their grade comes from. Again, it's not, did you hit your target? Did you not? It's the process.
That's the part that actually took me quite a while to get over. And I started to change my mind after I talked to our mutual friend, Jake, who I did an episode with a few months ago. And the problem that I was having, and then I think that a lot of teachers have, is it just doesn't seem right to assess students on an outcome. When teachers hear what you and Jake say, I think what pops into their head is, I'm going to assess a student on if they can hit a target a certain number of times, right? Like that they can demonstrate that accuracy. But what you're saying is that you're looking for the cues that you're teaching them along the way. Those are the components that you're assessing students on. And then we know that if students are consistently implementing those cues or consistently demonstrating those cues properly, they're likely going to be more accurate and hit the target more often. So it's more on the process than it is on the product. Is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, yeah, you nailed it on the head. I learned all my stuff from Jake. So I'm sure we sound like we have the same podcast going here. The fact that everybody can be successful in this class, and we're looking to make a lifelong mover. If that's what we're trying to, our ultimate goal is, then we need to have success. Success is a criteria for them to become a lifelong mover. So that can be different as far as differentiation goes. But as far as just the assessment piece, that's a piece I feel everyone can do, no matter the skill level. And then, of course, no matter the disabilities or any other kinds of challenges that you face.
The other thing that I think teachers think is, well, it's really easy for me to give students a certain number of points if they wear sneakers to school, or if they're like, air quotes, participating in class. I just give them their 5 points for those things. Because when they think about the other side of it, they think, well, I'm going to have to collect all of this data on students. Number one, I don't know how to do that efficiently. So I'd love to hear if you have any tips for teachers on how to collect data efficiently. And then the second part is they think, what am I going to do with all this data? And in part of your last response, you said that you utilize that data not just for assessment of students, but also for how to influence your lessons that are coming up. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's on a clerical perspective, that's the whole point of an assessment. If we can understand what they know and what they don't know, that should be guiding our next lesson. If I just roll out the ball and I don't know if the kids are learning the proper way to kick, if I don't know, what they're actually learning, if I don't even have an objective of the lesson, what am I going to do the next week? How do I build on top of that skill? And so I think it kills me when there's not scaffolded lessons built in, or when we see elementary schools that give a pacer test as an assessment or something like that, because it's easy. It's just writing down their times on their names. And I guess that goes back to our accountability. I teach 28 classes between my 4th and 5th grade classes. I have about 10 classes between 4th and 5th grade of videos that I have to watch. It takes time. So, I'm out after school 2 hours at home watching these videos, but man, that's what gets kids bought in, because they can also see that I watched it, that I cared, that I give feedback. And so that's the piece of the accountability where, yeah, a math teacher works that hard to grade their papers. Why can't we do the same thing and be accountable for what we're grading? So yeah, it does take some time. In my opinion, it's one where you kind of got to take it in the teeth and understand that you're a professional.
All right, so watching videos of students performing these various skill cues, that's going to take some time. What are some other maybe more efficient ways that you collect data during the class? Is the majority of the data that you collect video and then you watch it when you get the opportunity to? Or are you collecting data also while students are performing the skill and you're kind of, circulating, doing laps around the gym?
Having a whole bunch of different grade levels, each assessment looks different. And so for the videos, yes, I'm walking around giving real time feedback in the moment so that they can submit their video whenever. And I watch it on my own time. However, for the younger grades, obviously their computer skills aren't the greatest. And so we probably won't do video assessments, but that's what I'm going to say. I pull 4 or 5 at a time. I have a real simple checklist for them. There's like a locomotor for two-footed jumps for kindergarten. It's a simple yes, no checklist. And then I go through my roster. We play a game, cross the river, lily pad hop, whatever you want to call it. And I just watch for students who aren't making two-footed jumps. Right. And so you might have 5 or 6 out of the entire class, but it doesn't take more than 10 minutes to do a 25 kid assessment. It seems formative, but if the kids understand that they're taking an assessment, they understand what the cues are, and then they don't do that, that's the piece that we're grading, right? So it's observational, in the moment, authentic assessment.
I think the other part that you'll hear from teachers when it comes to a high quality assessment protocol like you have is that they don't have the time with their students to take that extra time away from what they would normally be teaching them in order to assess them, as if assessment needs to be this separate thing that happens, on a certain day, a week, a certain point in your unit. You're describing a method where you're assessing students while they're playing an activity. Students probably don't even know that they're being assessed while they participate in that activity. Do you have any additional thoughts on that or any other examples on how you embed assessment into your daily lesson so that it doesn't feel like you're taking away from what you would normally be teaching students while you're collecting that data?
Well, I'll kind of clarify too. I kind of mentioned 2 different ways that I do that up. I mentioned that I'll pull 4 or 5 kids aside while everybody else is playing a game. They hit their assessment real quick, drawing a wall, whatever the case would be. They go back into the game. I call 5 out. That's one way that I do it so that the students who are not assessing, they're still engaging in the activity. They're still enhancing their growth. But I also do it, especially with the younger ages, because management of kindergarten classes can be difficult at times. I tend to do tier 1 instruction, right? And so everybody's listening at the same time. I'm explaining the game, I'm explaining the cues, explaining strategies, whatever my lesson objective is. And then as they're playing, I have a rubric on my side with my roster, and I'm finding names of each kid. And as they're playing, I'm seeing if they can think about hopping, skipping, or jumping rope, again, whatever the objective is.
In the assessment protocol that I detail in the book, I tried to make it as efficient as possible, knowing that PE teachers see hundreds of students a week. I recommended that teachers try to assess each student at least one time during the course of an entire unit. So you might only assess a student on standard 1 in your 4 or 5 day unit on throwing. But then at the end of a semester or at the end of a trimester, you would have multiple data points for various students on all of the standards. So I might track data on you, Derek, in standard 1 in this unit, and then I know that in the next unit, I'm going to be looking to capture a data point on standard 2 or standard 3. Does that seem like a reasonable goal, or do you think that that's not pushing it far enough? Do you try to capture data on all 4 of the standards for every student for every unit, or do you try to spread it out over the course of a trimester or a semester like I just clumsily tried to describe?
No, I'm on board with you. I get you. It's difficult too because at least the standards in Nevada, they're actually condensed, the 5 standards that they normally have into 2, and it's pretty much skill development and social emotional learning. And so I can hit both of those standards in a lesson. I mean, we'll save the social emotional talk for later, but you can have a social emotional objective and you can have a skill development objective at the same time, and they can work harmoniously. What I find difficult about a strategy like that might be trying to have a 6 week, a 9 week plan where we fit all the standards simultaneously. Maybe I do need to try it like that because currently I set an objective. My whole lesson stems around this objective. And so it might be students will demonstrate proper underhand throwing cues and technique will be my objective. So we get into instant activity, after my set induction, where it'll be fun, we engage the heart rate, but it's about underhand throwing, and so I'm hitting that national standard. And then my lessons to follow that are all about the underhand throwing. And so I don't know how on a clerical standpoint it would be where I watch Mr. Carey. I watch him throughout all 5 World 4 quarters and see how the standards align all at the same time and document that. I'm open to listening about it. I'd love to hear more about it, but yeah, like I said, I want to be challenged.
Yeah, I think with 2 standards, it makes the task quite a bit easier. You're lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might, after this episode, you might have an influx of PE teachers moving to Nevada. Who knows? It's going
Well,
to
as
be good
long
for
as they're good
business.
ones.
As long as they're good ones, yeah. So that's some really great advice that you gave teachers on how you capture data, how you do it efficiently, how you align your assessments back to your daily objectives, and even how you utilize rubrics so that you know that you're scoring students accurately on their progress towards those skills. For a teacher who hears this and might be thinking about moving over from the 5 points for sneakers, 5 points if you are engaged in the class today, but this is still, a pretty intimidating project. What might you recommend as a first step for someone in that position?
The first step is to understand what the end product is. And so I kind of break this into 2 different sections. As we can unit plan, where we plan for 4 or 5 different days. And by the end of the unit, this is what I want to assess on. This is what I want kids to know. You can kind of have that same strategy on a per day lesson as well. You should have a daily objective. And so when I'm designing my lesson plan, especially as a first year teacher or in my early years, I would start with what I wanted them to know. If my entire lesson, I need them to know XYZ. And then that's when I start my structure of my lesson to build into that. Right. I feel like a lot of teachers that I talk to, especially in my area, they think of the most fun and best game that they can and then try to make it an objective out of that, which in a scope and sequence of a unit, it doesn't work out. All of a sudden they're just all over the place. And so if you can make your unit plan with an end goal in mind first, then add the lessons in after that, it kind of gives a more directed view, a point of what I'm trying to teach them.
Let's move over to talking about standards-based social skills. I think the thing that I'm most interested in is how you intentionally teach a standards-based social skill. What I see happening sometimes is a teacher will say something like, right before students jump into the activity that they're going to play for that day or the first activity for that lesson, they say something like, don't forget to show good sportsmanship. And then students go off and they play in that activity. That to me is not intentionally teaching students a standards-based social skill. How do you communicate to your students what social skills they're expected to keep front of mind and to practice and make progress towards in any given lesson?
The biggest thing about that is identifying. We do a semester reflection survey, and this I include things about PE that are informative for me to know what kind of units are going well, what kind of units are not going well from the student's perspective. But kind of the hidden objective around that survey is to identify what needs are happening in PE regarding social emotional needs, right? And so they're simple as questions as, do I feel safe? Do I have the tools necessary to learn? And so again, using that data to drive further instruction, it's another assessment is, but it also helps me understand what kind of needs are necessary in my school. When I started doing that, it actually lined up really, really well with our counseling. It was a nice way to kind of combine those 2 curriculums within that. And so I worked with my counselor. We developed in line with our Nevada State social emotional standards, or CASEL is what it's called, CASEL. And we kind of aligned our 5 social emotional standards to that, as well as our own kind of own spin on it. And from there, I could kind of develop an intent with each lesson. In the beginning, when I'm developing a lesson plan, I would start with my lesson objective for PE. And then in my lesson plan, I have a written objective of today we learn about resilience. And so then I can kind of make some of those lessons tied into not only just dribbling a basketball, but also what do I do if I mess up, and kind of have an intent point aligning with those standards homogeneously mixed within a lesson plan. And it sounds complicated and difficult when I'm talking about it, but man, all you have to do is add another box on your lesson plan and thinking about how they intertwine.
Okay, so if I was teaching resilience to my PE class, I would want to make sure that I give students the opportunity to reflect on what resilience looks like, whether it's in the current class that you're teaching or a time in their life where they had to be resilient. I think the thing that I kind of revert back to is just like a turn and talk, pairing students up and asking them a question that's going to be grade level appropriate. Maybe if it was like a upper elementary, third or fourth grade, I might ask them, when was a time, outside of PE class that you had to show resilience? Is that something that you would do too, or do you have a different approach to how you like really focus on that social skill for the day, in this case, resilience?
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you too. The way that I tackled social emotional learning has changed a lot in the past 3 years. I've made a lot of errors with it. And probably some of that is I care about PE growth so much. I'm doing everything I can to try to support that. When I do these turn-in talks, it's more about tell your partner about a time when you made an underhand throw and wasn't successful. What did you do? How did you handle it? And then based off their responses, we kind of have a quick 30-second, 45-second discussion of because I missed the cornhole board 3 times in a row in my underarm throw. That hurt. And so like I got mad and threw the beanbags and quit. And then we talk about specifically related to life circumstance. How do we get over that? What tools can I use? What can I possibly do?
That connection that you made between the social skill that you're teaching for that day of resilience and the physical standard that you're teaching, which is the example of underhand throwing that we keep using. You connected both of those pieces together in one question, in one opportunity for students to turn and talk to a partner and get to share what their understanding is of both of those concepts. I think that's brilliant.
Well, and I also use this social emotional concept as a set induction. I feel like a lot of people in our profession are are a little nervous to let their pride drop a little bit and either tell them a true story or tell them a story that or be animated. And especially in elementary school, man, the more animated that you are, the bigger buy-in you can get. And that's the name of the game. If you can get them bought in, teach them anything.
I'm also making a connection back to our first topic, which was the reputation of a PE program. I feel like most people, whether they're building leaders or parents, community members, when they think of what students learn in a PE class, they would probably just say, they learned like the rules to a game, like they learned how to play soccer. Maybe they would say that they learned a certain physical skill. I saw them playing soccer today. They probably learned how to dribble or something like that. Those are like your standard answers. The one about the rules, I don't like. I don't think PE teachers should be like focusing on teaching students rules, but that's a different conversation. The one about dribbling or the physical skill, of course, is totally fine, right? That is one of the things that PE teachers teach. What I think surprises folks is when a PE teacher also makes the connection, like you're talking about, to a standards-based social skill. Most people's reactions are, oh my goodness, I didn't even know that they taught those things in PE. Things
Right.
like resilience, things like being inclusive of others, things like modifying activities so that all students can experience success, all of the different standards-based social skills that you and listeners know about. What impact does teaching standards-based social skills have on the reputation of a PE program?
I feel like this would be a good time to bring up that diverse curriculum. The reputation of PE right now is, like you said, roll out the ball, teach them how to play basketball, and right then we'll do 3 games of 5-on-5 basketball. I love basketball. I'm a basketball coach, but I also understand that's not what kids need. We get enough basketball and football and whatever else you want to call it. And so I look at what the community needs and I develop my curriculum around that. So being over here in Nevada, we have a lot of outdoor life, a lot of hunting, fishing, a lot of that kind of stuff. And so I build an outdoor ed program, which is a great opportunity to talk about resilience and fine motor skills and problem solving and teamwork because they have to build shelters and problem solving because they have to figure out what happens if the fire doesn't start and all these other things. And so when you have this diverse curriculum, not only does your reputation at PE increase, but the amount of kids that are bought into your program also increases. The behaviors decrease. And so when all those things are all working together, and then you get to start talking about what makes a good teammate, what makes a good partner, what makes good collaboration, what is good communication through through this really diverse curriculum. That's when it all kind of works together, right? It makes it all good.
Let's connect those last two topics. So, what does it look like when you assess students on their social skills? So, let's say that you are teaching students not just a physical skill today, but you're also teaching them something like how to be resilient. How do you collect data on whether or not students understand what resilience is? Is it that they can articulate something along those lines? Is it that they can physically demonstrate that in an activity to you? What exactly are you looking for in order to determine that students are leaving class with a better understanding of a social skill and not just the physical skill?
Just like a physical skill, you have to break it up into grade level bands, right? You can't assess the same social emotional standard for a kindergartner as you can for a fifth grader. The same way underhand throwing or any other skill. For a K to first grade level band, it probably looks like identification with a exit ticket. It's just a simple verbal yes, no, where they're saying resilience or whatever social emotional topic we're talking about. And then, of course, scaffolded through kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth. By the time they hit fifth, I'm looking for application of that standard. And so part of their grade, assuming, and I don't do this for every unit, and maybe I should, but for some of the units, we'll be playing a game and like our cooperative learning, they're assessed on their ability to engage in a game, to engage in group work, and exhibit the proper skills of compromise, of communication, of whatever skills that I actually taught them. Going back to the assessment, how do you assess something you haven't taught before? If you are assessing on teamwork, but you're not teaching them the components to be a necessary good team player, how do you assess that? And so it's that scaffolded, pre-thought out plan.
Makes sense to me, Derek. If you want to assess students on something, you have to teach them what that thing looks like, right?
Right.
Let's finish up with a scenario that I have for us. So imagine there's a PE teacher who's trying to shift from grading on participation or dressing out to a procedure on assessment like you're talking about. But they're getting pushback from various stakeholders, whether it's students who are saying, like, we never had to do this in the past, and this is different, and students are giving them pushback. Maybe it's colleagues, fellow PE teachers. Oftentimes, PE teachers have partners, and there's team teaching going on. They're saying that this is too much work for PE and that we shouldn't be doing these types of things. Let's just give them 5 points on if they wear socks to class today. How would you advise a teacher in that position to respond? You know that they want to do the right thing and they want to continue to make progress in their own practice. What advice would you have for them?
I actually face this problem a lot. Part of the reason why Jake Miller and I get along so well is because we look for opportunities to get in the classroom and in each other's head more or less about teaching. And so that really opened up my eyes to what it could look like. And so I know that it can look like that. I guess the advice would be to find someone that you trust that knows what quality PE looks like. Truth be told, is it's not going to be easy for anyone to change anybody's mind. I'm not saying that we can't. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try, but it's definitely difficult when you're surrounded by people who more or less don't care. No, they don't care about PE or their own job for whatever reason. And so holding yourself accountable through all that is difficult. But if you can latch on to someone who cares as much as you do, it makes handling these people, these naysayers as a problem, it makes them handling them much, much easier.
And just a note on the naysayers. I feel like there are so many good PE teachers out there. They're just quieter and they're harder to find. So I know that sometimes on this podcast, myself and sometimes my guests, it's easy for us to talk about like the teachers who are doing things the way that we wouldn't recommend, like not best practice in PE, because they're the ones who are shouting the loudest on all these different groups. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, of course, you know, you and I both know that there are so many incredible PE teachers out there. We're just looking for creative ways to influence the ones who are maybe not the first ones to shout out on a Facebook group, you know, their poor assessment practices because they might be beyond reach. But the people who are in these situations who are thinking, I know that this isn't the way that I should be doing it, but it's what the teacher before me did, and it's what the teacher that I work with wants to do. That's our audience, right? Those are the people that we're trying to influence and say, look, you can do these things. You just have to start small, start with a big plan, but then put in small steps in order to start to implement practices that are more aligned with a high quality PE program. Derek, it was a pleasure. Your students and your community and your school is so lucky to have you. I really appreciate all of the experience and expertise that you shared with listeners today. We'll do it again sometime.
Oh, thank you for having me, man. And I learned just as much as I hope somebody learned from me.